This is Jordan Tower with JT News. Make sure you smash that like button, smash that subscribe, and let's get right into the news. All right, so Kid Cudi comes to testify today. This is going to be interesting. Let's start reading this. I don't know if he's done testifying yet, but yeah, he arrived earlier and smoking a cig, and he was ready to ready to put everybody on blast. Now, from certain things I've seen, Diddy supposedly broke into his house when he knew that they were cheating and all this other stuff, and he tried to threaten Kid Cudi. So let's just start it from the beginning. It says, note, down at the courthouse entrance, much security, presumably for arrival of Kid Cudi, because everyone's excited about this one, now up in court. Before jury is brought in. Judge, I didn't hear government objecting to Mr. Kaplan testifying about Ms. Ventura asking for drugs in Boston. The judge says, let's get Mr. Kaplan back on the stand. So we'll start with this, and then we'll get into the Kid Cudi. Now, Kid Cudi also, there's allegations that Diddy tried to blow up his car over the Cassie situation. So we'll get right into that. It's going to be quick, trust me. They're going to get this Kaplan guy off the stand immediately. Judge, Mr. Kaplan back on the stand, okay? He says, "What did you care?" This is the guy that was an assistant for Diddy, just so you know. He was one of the assistants for 2 years, I think, around 2014 and 15. When did you carry cash from Mr. Combs? He says, $50,000 on a private jet. How did you pick up cash from Mr. Combs? He says, $10,000 at Western Union for Combs Enterprises. Did you pick up for cash from Mr. Combs? $10,000 at Western Union for Combs Enterprises. What long-term relationships of Mr. Combs were you aware of? Cassie, Kim, and Gina. Those are the main ones we know of. Who is Kim? The mother of his children. Cassie, girlfriend. Gina, another girlfriend. Okay. The government says the jet flight to Las Vegas. What was the layout of the jet? He said 4 chairs, a partition. I had a partial view over my right shoulder. When you witnessed violence by Mr. Combs, on Ventura, why didn't you intervene? He says, my career. I mean, it's not my, it's not his business, honestly. Like, I wouldn't intervene either. I'd be like, jeez, get away from these. I mean, it's like, if first of all, you're up in the air, he could open the door and throw you out, right? I ain't trying to get thrown off this jet midair. After the glass breaking, what did Mr. Combs do? He came forward. Cassie stayed in the back. He asked me to get creams to conceal the bruising on her face. How did you pay for it? He says, corporate credit card. Did you leave Combs Enterprise? Why did you leave? He says, I didn't think I should be covering things up. Like buying the witch hazel. Also, my father had prostate cancer. Any violence? He threw things at Gina in the entryway of the home on Star Island. What was he throwing? He said green apples. How hard? Very hard. Later, took the medicine bag into their room. Mr. Combs wanted me to leave quickly. Then what? He says, I heard Gina at the gate in male voices. Who? Security. When you left, what did you do? He says, I collected myself, then went to work for an integrated marketing firm. Cross-exam. Okay, Diddy's lawyers comes in. Why did you go to work for Combs Enterprises? He says, he was an incredible entrepreneur. I have learned from him. What did Brian do as COO? He says, ensuring profitability of each unit. Then he says, I was an employee of when Revolt TV launched. Tell me about it, Combs' lawyer says. He says, well, we were on the 6th floor of 1710 Broadway. Everyone was there. It was momentous. Combs' lawyer says, diversity was important to Mr. Combs. He says, specifically for African Americans. He says, what did Blue Flame do? He says, marketing for Ciroc. Was it Diageo? He says, they own Johnny Walker and others. Mr. Combs set up a marketing entity for Ciroc. Then he says, your job, what was it? He says, for example, Mr. Combs would say, hey, we're going to leave the house. He meant 3 to 5 minutes. I had to check for the list of bags, toiletry. It was a bad look in for me if something wasn't there. Okay, so he says, it was a binder near you. I can't read that. He says, it says Southern District. He says, I'm handing you something to refresh your recollection. Take a look at it as you want to. Then he says, you ran an off-site training, a graduate from Harvard Business School, also Kenny Burns. He says, I remember. You were effective, right? He says, I worked hard. He says, I don't know how you'll answer. Was it good or bad? He said, it was complicated. Then Diddy lawyer says, he didn't need to yell at you when you brought 2 waters. Well, what? He says, I worked hard. Okay, who was Biggie? He says, a huge rapper who unfortunately passed away. He says, wasn't Biggie's birthday a holiday at Combs Enterprises? He says, yes. Was it a creative environment? He says, absolutely. It attracted all kinds of people, lawyers, musicians, advertising people. He says, a few specific questions. You used a corporate credit card? He says, yes. How did Mr. Combs pay? He says, KK held his wallet with a black Amex in it. He says, you have no reason to think he kept track of how baby oil was paid for? He says, no reason. Or applesauce? He says, he loves applesauce. He says, or cheeseburgers? He says, on everything. On cheeseburgers? Wait, he puts applesauce on cheeseburgers? Yeah, Diddy's weird. He says, let's talk about the plane. You heard glass breaking. You didn't see it? He says, I didn't see it. He says, the incident with Gina, you walked into the house. There's a thin table. He says, I don't know. He says, you don't remember how a person could get out of the gate at 2-Star Island? He says, no, I just heard screaming and commotion. Screams of terror? Of how can I open this gate? And then he says, I don't know how to distinguish between the two. Then Diddy's lawyer says, he threatened your jobs, but did he physically threaten you? He says, no. He says, you talked about Kim Porter. How was she different? He says, his respect for her. They had incredible kids. He says, thank you. Then he says, when you set up a hotel room for Mr. Combs and and Miss Porter, was there baby oil? He says, just lotions. You expressed caution about hotels while you clean them afterward. He says, yes, a hotel staff could sell photos. Everyone wants a payday. Then he says, you sent him a photo of him and Kim Porter? He says, after she died, I was heartbroken for him. You were close? He says, I invited him to my wedding. I didn't hear back. Objection! Wait, he ejected his own, the witness. Surprised looks. And he says, you respected him? Yes. How are you going to object? You asked him a question, and then he answered, and then you object. I've never seen a lawyer say objection to the answer of the person they're cross-examining. Because there's nothing to be like, nobody's going to be like, that's crazy. Then he says, what's this a photo of? And he says, me, KK, Mr. Combs at Teterboro Airport. He just got the jet. That's why there's champagne. You're happy to be there, right? He says, no, refresh it. I was glad I had found the mascara in the back seat. And then Diddy's lawyer says, they found you and subpoenaed you? He says, yes, I had to retain counsel right away. Then he says, no further questions. Judge, redirect. Government says, which incidents shook you? He says, the plane with Cassie, the apples with Gina. He says, I felt guilty I didn't do anything after the incident with Cassie on the plane. Government, but you didn't see any injuries. He says, people can be injured without injuries being visible. The tonality and tension with the apples he threw at Gina, it was troubling. Government, you told Miss Coram about the 2 incidents? He says, yes. And I told her I am willing to stand behind the behavior. I'm not willing. I am unwilling. Okay, I'm unwilling to stand behind the behavior. And then I was quitting. Did Christina say she would quit? He says, no. How long did she stay after you told her? Until recently. Next witness. The government calls Scott Muscuddy, a.k.a. Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi takes the witness stand in a leather jacket and a white shirt and blue jeans. Okay, so here we go. They ask, first off, what did you do for work? He says, I'm an actor and a musician known as Kid Cudi. Who is this? He says, Cassie. This is the government asking Kid Cudi. He says, we dated in 2011. Who else was she involved with? He says, Sean Combs. Government says, what did you know about their status? He says that she and Sean Combs had some problems and they weren't dating anymore. And then the government says, in December 2011, did law enforcement respond to your home? He says, yes, I had a break-in. Cassie called me at 5:36 a.m. She says Sean Combs had found out about us. She asked me to pick her up, so I did. Yeah? Why? She says she was worried. What was her demeanor? He says, very stressed and worried. Then the government says, where did you go? He says, the Sunset Marquee. Why? I thought it was safe, off the radar. And then he continues, who else did you speak with? He says, Capricorn Clark. She sounded near tears. Government says, what did she say? She says, that Sean Combs in the car near my house. Combs, Brian Steele. Objection. So Brian Steele's going to go after, that seems like who's going to go after Kid Cudi and Cross. Okay, let's see. You called Sean Combs? He says, I did. He said, I'm waiting here for you. When you arrived, what did the outside look like? He said, pretty normal. Any security cameras? He says, yes, but I found out they weren't working. But the security cameras had been moved. Did you move them? He says, no. What did you see inside your home? He says, gifts were open, some stuff I got from Chanel, and my dog was locked up in the bathroom. How did you usually leave your dog? He says, I let him roam. How long had you had your dog? He said, 3 years. He said, what changes were the behavior of your dog after the break-in? He says, jittery, on edge all the time. Then he says, I got back in, called Sean Combs again and says, I was looking for him. I wanted to fight him, you know? Did he answer? He says, yeah. He says, I'm on my way. I thought to myself. Then objection. Grounds non-responsive. Overruled. Ask a new question, they say. It says, when you saw Cassie, how did she seem? He says, depressed. Did you see Cassie in Connecticut? He says, yes, she needed it. She needed that loving. They could go dress shopping together. Government says, when did Mr. Combs call you? He says, yes, he hit me a few times. Government hit. Kid Cudi says, called me. Government says, what did you say? He says, that I didn't want to talk to him. He broke into my house and hurt my dog. Government says, did you and Miss Ventura break up? He says, yes. What about your car? He says, well, my dog's babysitter called me and told me my car was on fire. Government, where were you? He says, at a relative of my ex-girlfriend. At a relative of my ex-girlfriend? Okay, he says, where did you go? He says, to my house, 8925 Hollywood Hills Road. Let me show you 6 pictures. Do you recognize? He says, yes, that's my Porsche. He says, what's the damage to, that's the damage to my Porsche from a Molotov cocktail. Government says, who took these photos? He says, Chip, a good friend and collaborator. He says, what depicted here? He says, the hole they cut in the roof of my car to put the Molotov cocktail in. The fact that he has no working cameras is crazy. I mean, dude. Then he says, what was your reaction to the car being set on fire? He says, what the F? Objection. Overruled. Break. All right. So then before the jurors are back, we will finish the witness today. The government says yes. Though the cross of Mr. Kaplan was 3 times as long as it should have been. Jury re-enters. The government says, was the damage to your car present before the call from dog sitter? Says no. Government says, Did you think it was accidental or intentional? Intentional. Did Diddy hurting a dog? I mean, bro, even 50 Cent was like, dude, you hurt a dog over a girl? Come on, bro. Then, where did you last see Ventura? Cassie. Said at the Soho House. I'd reached out to Diddy and said, let's talk. This is getting out of hand. Then Brian Steele says, can we have a sidebar? The judge says, do you have an objection? Brian Steele says, yes. The judge says, sustain, disregard, and move on. Then the government says, who set up the meeting at Soho House? Kid Cudi says, D-Rock and my manager. D-Rock was back again. Government says, what was Mr. Combs doing? He says, standing like a Marvel supervillain. Then there's some laughter in the car. Then he said, we were homies. You know that this is my girl. What did you say? He says, I thought you had broken up. Then Diddy offers me some water twice. It was weird. Diddy being so calm. Government says, what did Cassie say? He says, that we have fallen in love. Things happened. And then the government says, what did you say to Mr. Combs? He says, I said, what about my car? He says, I don't know what you're talking about, and walked away. I would have said, yo, you better send me money for that car. Diddy's a moron, bro. Like he's gotten away with doing like street stuff for years. He's always had street guys down with him. Always. We know that. Wolf, a lot of these people, right? Even you could consider Gene Deal somewhat street, because even though he had like regular jobs, like as like a security, he had like different kind of jobs, right? But he understood the streets and was connected to the streets. So Diddy's always had ways of getting things done. D-Rock obviously does a lot of his dirt. I'm surprised D-Rock's not arrested. But anyways, it was weird. Sean Combs was being so calm. What did Cassie say? She talked about they had fallen in love. Okay, so then he asked about his car. Diddy said he didn't know what he was talking about and left. He said, did you see Sean Combs later? He says, a few years later, also at Soho House. He says, I'm just sorry for all that BS. I was surprised, so I found peace with it. No further questions at this time. The judge says, Mr. Steele. Then Brian Steele steps in. He says, I want to ask you some questions about your Porsche in 2022. And then, so Brian Steele's off point. He already has the year wrong. And then Kid Cudi corrects him and says 2012. See, Brian Steele, I don't think he's going to be so sharp during this. Diddy is a man of going after things that are popping at the moment. Brian Steele's a star right now because of the Young Thug trial, right? So he had to have him, right? So he goes, he says, Brian Steele says, I apologize. You got a call about the damage to your vehicle. Any surveillance photos? He says, nope. My dog's babysitter did send me pictures of the damage. Then Diddy says, the DNA taken. Are you aware if it came back female? And then he says, objection, none, no foundation. The judge says, sustained. Brian Steele says, do you know there were DNA results? And then the judge says he'll allow it. And then Kid Cudi says, no. Diddy's lawyer Steele, Brian Steele says, Miss Ventura told you it was over? And he says, we just stopped talking. And then Brian Steele says, you told the honorable court and this jury that she played you. He says, yes. Brian Steele says, she played you and you had no clue? Kid Cudi said, no clue. Yeah, in a way, because Kid Cudi probably thought they had broken up and they hadn't. And who wants to go out with a girl that has a jealous boyfriend out there, right? That's not over her. That's putting you in a horrible situation. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a situation like that. I have one time, and it is you bounce, you leave, because you know what? You don't know if that person's gonna, like, if you know that there's still something there, like, you should leave, because You don't have to man up and be like, yo, nobody gonna tell me. You could end up dead, bro. Some people do crazy things for girls, right? And if you have no real attachment to that girl yet, leave, you know? If it's new and fresh, bounce. They should be completely over their past problems before they move forward with you, right? So then he says she played him. You know, they established that. Then Diddy's lawyer, Brian Steele, says, in 2011 you went on tour. He says, yes, 65 locations. Oh, no, then he has 65 locations, and Kid Cudi says, yes. Then Brian Steele says, at the time, Diddy was an icon. Fair to say? He says, of course, yeah. Then Brian Steele says, you and Miss Ventura had a sexual relationship? The government says, objection. They do a sidebar. After the sidebar, Kid Cudi says, Mr. Steele, can I? And the judge says, no, you can do that on redirect. Do you want to tell me something? Brian Steele says. He says, Sean Combs asked me to do a song with Cassie in 2010. He says, thank you. Then he says, you believe, then Brian Steele says, you believe they left your front door unlocked? Who? He says, Kid Cudi says, yes. Brian Steele says, no forced entry? No. Just presence open, the door in the bathroom. I'm not belittling, just saying, asking, you called Sean Combs? Wait. Just present. Wait. So Brian Steele says, just presence opened, door in the bathroom. I'm not belittling, just asking. Like, you called Diddy? And Kid Cudi says, yeah. Steele says, was he calm? He says, yes. Then Brian Steele says, you went to see him and you didn't think he had a gun? Kid Cudi says, I couldn't call it. Brian Steele says, you're a strong person. That's how you categorize yourself? Kid Cudi says, yeah. This crossed the line. Brian Steele says, Cassie told you that she was abused. Kid Cudi says, yes. Then Diddy's lawyer says, but she never said she was sexually abused, true? Kid Cudi says, she did not. Brian Steele says, you loved her? Tell me if I'm wrong. Kid Cudi says, I did. Brian Steele says, you got played by the same person who played Mr. Combs, Cassie Ventura? In 13 years since you have ever been notified in California that there has been any more action on this car fire, Kid Cudi says no. Brian Steele says, did Miss Ventura have multiple phones? He says, I don't remember. 35-12. Kid Cudi says, I said it. If I said it, I said it. Okay. Brian Steele says, do you know what a burner phone is? Kid Cudi says, untraceable. Brian Steele says, the trespass. You call it a break-in. Miss Ventura told you she'd given your home address to Mr. Combs? Kid Cudi says, yes, in the morning. Wow. What? Yo, Cassie is... That's... Wow. Brian Steele says, no more questions, thanks. Kid Cudi says, no problem. Wow, Cassie gave up his address? Judge, redirect. Government says, what did Miss Ventura confide in you about the abuse? Kid Cudi says that he hit her, sometimes kicked her. Government says, the day of the break-in, it was carefree? Was she carefree? Kid Cudi says, nope. What did Capricorn Clark tell you, the government asks? He says, Sean Combs, an affiliate, forced into a car to come to my house. I called police. Sean Combs and an affiliate okay. Government says, how would you describe Cassie that day? Kid Cudi says, just really shook him finding out about us. And then government says, why did your relationship with Miss Ventura end? Kid Cudi says, the drama was getting out of hand. I wanted I wanted to give space. Government says, what drama? He says, the break-in for my safety, her safety. They say, objection, from Brian Steele. Ground speculation overruled. Yeah, come on, man. Why did you have safety concerns, the government asked. Because I knew Diddy was violent. Then Combs says, Your Honor, maybe we approach. They approach. The side meeting at then the government says, the meeting at Soho House. Diddy said, I don't know what you're talking about about your car. Did you believe him? Combs lawyer says, objection. Judge says, rephrase. Government says, what was your understanding? Kid Cudi says that he was lying. Government, no further questions. That's it. That says, Judge, any recross? Diddy's lawyer says, no, Your Honor. Judge, Mr. Muscudi, you're done. All right, that's it. And then they're back 42 minutes ago. And before the jury comes in, we probably won't read the whole next witness because we'll save that for the ending of the day. But it says, AUSA Comey says they want to put exhibits in showing Miss Ventura. We think the stereotype that she dresses like, floozy, basically. The judge says, I only have an album cover. And they say, we can bring in the screen, blah, blah, blah. What's the relevance of these exhibits? The next witness did Miss Cassie's makeup. Okay, so did Cassie's makeup. Miss Ventura testified about her career being impacted. Huh. Let's see. Then, okay, so they bring in a makeup artist. We're not going to read this yet because... Okay, so they're gonna really just surround this whole trial around Cassie. This is an abuse case. That's what it is. This is not a RICO case. I don't care about anybody in the company. You don't understand. Da, 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 da. You guys don't get it. Okay, go read some cases. Go look at a real RICO. Okay, this isn't turning out to be a RICO. I don't know why they just called it a RICO, but. This is really going to end up just being... They're trying to invoke emotion with a jury so they can convict. That's it. And they'll win. They're going to prove that. And they're going to invoke emotion, and they're going to win. And I'm not saying Diddy's innocent. He's not. But I'm just saying, why wasn't he charged with blackmail and all this other stuff, That stuff is, easy to prove. This is Jordan Tower with JT News. I'll check you guys the next one. That was pretty interesting. Kid Cudi not having a lot of cameras. Some were messed with, but to not put up cameras right after that someone just broke in your house and you couldn't capture the Porsche being lit on fire. And why was your Porsche outside when you weren't even home? I don't know. That's maybe he just wanted a new Porsche. I don't know what's going on. Anyways. This is Jordan Tower with JT News. I'll check you guys the next one. Peace.